fractions of a second, I realized what he was doing. He was trying to get a grenade off of his vest. And so from probably 15 feet above him, standing over him, I shot him probably 4 or 5 times until he stopped moving.
Many veterans remember combat as a profoundly raw experience, a time in their lives where their wills, their bravery, and their fragility are right out there, without any cover. Some of them learn that it's possible to kill without remorse and without malice, but it's impossible to kill without consequence. Even when the consequence is satisfaction or the sense of a wrong righted, killing is something that stays with a person for the rest of their lives. Coming to terms with it is something Russell Davies discovered is just a part of the process of coming home.
You know, I think if most people were to take a step back and just try to, for a moment, fathom the idea of going to a third world country and having to take lives that were taken by your hands, and then coming back and trying to adjust to a social norm, that more people could realize why PTSD is having such a tragic effect on soldiers returning from combat.
What is true bravery? What makes a hero a hero? Tested by the worries of what's happening at home, thousands of miles away, and the reality of what you're facing here and now. When your life is in danger every second, and it's either kill or be killed. From Wondery and Incongruity Media, this is Anthony Russo, and this is War. Russell Davies was bounced out of high school just shy of graduation for fighting, and it nearly kept him from joining the military. But in 2006, the Army was struggling with enlistment numbers, and his recruiter became a fixer, and Davies became a soldier. He joined with 3 of his high school friends, Josh Quick, Andy Harris, and Chad Cook. They all arrived at basic training together, but they ended up being deployed separately, and as it turned out, Davies was built for the infantry. He excelled in basic training and went on to join the 187th Airborne Infantry Regiment, a group called the Rakkasans, and they were getting ready to go back to Iraq at the end of 2007. It wasn't until joining that regiment that he got a good sense of what being in the military was going to be about for him.
I thought it was going to be a bunch of young, gung-ho, patriotic, ready to fight people looking to serve their country, but it wasn't. The infantry consists of people like me that had gotten in trouble, people that weren't educated enough to do anything higher than infantry, people that were just looking to jump in the military to gain their visas or citizenships to the US, people looking to escape struggles of being born and raised in the ghetto. You quickly realize that the infantry is a pretty big mixed batch of individuals, all with their own complications and struggles coming into it. You realize, that even though we're all different, we all come from different backgrounds, that we're all the same. So the Rakkasans do train like nobody's business. It's frustrating. Every other brigade there is getting off at normal hours, and we're, majority of the times we don't even get our weekends. We train all through the weekends. But I was comfortable with that idea. And, I've just figured the more training, the more beneficial we'll be in combat. You're eager to prove yourself worthy. You don't want to be a cherry anymore. And so, yeah, I was definitely ready to get there, or at least I thought I was.
There's a lot to this disconnect between the new cherry infantrymen and the combat veterans. On the surface, there's some fraternal harassment. Sure, the cherries get the shit details and generally get pushed around by their peers, but there's also something deeper. The people who've seen combat understand just how ignorant and psychologically unprepared the newbies are for what they're about to do. It's something that those in the know only feel like they can communicate by making things harder on the ignorant. As with any life-altering experience, combat only makes sense from the other side, and the only way to get there is to cross over.
We were in Iraq less than a month, trying to provide security for EOD to clear this road so we could start pushing the perimeter out more, followed by a group of engineers and supply. that we were providing security for. We'd go 10 minutes, stop, IED, EOD would take care of it, detonate it, we'd continue mission. I heard a huge explosion, catastrophic IED hit one of the trucks. The other platoons providing security moved in to try and save the wounded, but the truck was destroyed so massively that, I think it killed 3 of the individuals that were in that truck. So meanwhile, while they were doing that, we pushed forward, made it to the location in which we were trying to set up a guard tower with the engineers. About an hour and a half went by. We got kind of complacent. We all met up in front of a Humvee to, discuss what we were going to be doing afterwards. And that was when we got lit up by machine gun fire on our position. Myself and 2 other guys were sitting on the hood of the Humvee. The turret gunner was still in his seat. I remember talking to him, and just the first burst of machine gun fire hit the Humvee that we were sitting on. And actually, I have a picture of the guy that was in the turret gun. If it wasn't for that bulletproof glass right in front of his face, that changed his life entirely.
Standing out in the open during a gunfight, it takes a second to register that you're being fired upon, especially the first time it happens. Of course, that's what training's for. Although as he's telling the story, it might seem like it took several seconds to respond, realistically, the response was immediate. Muscle memory takes the driver's seat so the brain can focus on a response.
You make yourself real small, trying to figure out where it was coming from. Saw engineers running all over the place. One dude jumped in the bucket of a front loader, realized real quickly where the fire was coming from. One of the 240s opened up in their direction. I started firing with my M4. I remember my squad leader being like, "You have a grenade launcher." And so I'm just like, shit. You do a good amount of training with the grenade launcher on your rifle, but at the same point, you're not a sniper with the damn thing, and you're lobbing grenades, 300 meters down range, and there are people out there. So yeah, I did. I started dropping 40 millimeters. He would adjust my fire. Machine guns were talking. We started bounding across a field. You're stomping through mud, that's pretty much, almost knee deep with grass growing out of it. For a good amount of it, you're like, this provides no coverage whatsoever. We made it to the house, kicked in some doors. I just remember thinking holy shit, this is real. There's people running from you, and you don't realize, is that the guy that was just shooting at me? Or is that somebody that's just like, holy shit, there's Americans shooting in this direction? You're seeing people, and you have your gun pointed directly at their face, because you don't know the answer to that. They're scared, you're scared, and that first time you just don't know what to do. You're like, at what time is it appropriate to squeeze the trigger on my rifle? People have already died today. We almost died. Bullets are flying, and we have 15 fucking months to go.
By this point in the war, the insurgents knew what the response times were. They knew they had a maximum of 10 minutes before support showed up, so they took their shots and lived to fight another day. But kicking in the door to a strange house with absolutely no idea what was on the other side, Davies finally understood the disconnect between people who'd seen combat and those who hadn't. He could have found anything upon entering that house, from a booby trap to a hostel to a victim of one of the grenades he had launched at it earlier. He said that would have been the absolute worst. Throughout his career, throughout the careers of many of these combat veterans, the ambivalence isn't about killing, it's about discerning the bad guys from the regular Iraqis, which isn't all that easy.
Yeah, it was on the ECP, the entry control point. I was on guard. That's a good amount of your deployment, which I don't think a lot of people realize when they join the military, is that a good 8 hours of your day sometimes is going to be spent in a guard tower with one other individual looking at the exact same sector. There are times that you're just praying for something to happen. You got a 6-pack of Rippets, the Army provided energy drinks, a pack of cigs, a can of Copenhagen, and you're just mowing through it because you're just trying to stay awake. You have 8 hours to kill every day, and most people can tell their life story in 8 hours. And then you have that for 15 months. So, you realize the problems that all these people are facing back home, and loved ones, and their wives cheating on them or leaving them, or people just abusing their general powers of attorney, and all these things that all these soldiers are just dealing with so much shit going on back home, and all the meantime you're trying to to stay alive and keep other people alive as well. But yeah, I was on the ECP, and had a vehicle coming in. You just go through what your training tells you, and I just started shout, show, shove, shoot. Tried to shout, tried to show, started waving my hands frantically. This vehicle wasn't stopping. And I started gaining closer and closer. And I even remember the guy that outranked me that was behind the 50 cal was just kind of looking at me like, what do we do? After he had crossed pretty much the barrier of which we designated to be safe, I just opened up on the car and it screeched to a halt. It sat there for a moment, and I had my weapon drawn, trying to figure out what was going on. And all of a sudden the car just ripped in reverse and took off back the way it came in. 2 days later, female suicide bomber detonated herself. They killed 2 of the Iraqi army.
Incidents featuring female suicide bombers were on the rise by 2008. Reports at the time were that women who were widowed, orphaned, or both were more easily recruited and more likely to go through with the attack. Since this attack had followed the aborted one so closely, the assumption was that they were related, and the Iraqis wanted payback. As frustrated as the American forces were by IED attacks on the road, the Iraqi army and police were on the receiving end of suicide bomb attacks regularly, and their responses were nowhere near as measured as the American response. You know what's smart? Kicking off 2019 by planning out which roles your business needs to hire for. You know what else is smart? Starting off the new year strong by going to ziprecruiter.com/thisiswar to hire the right people. Unlike other job sites, ZipRecruiter finds qualified candidates for you. Its powerful matching technology scans thousands of resumes to identify people with the right skills, education, and experience, and actively invites them to apply for your job, so you get qualified candidates fast. That's why ZipRecruiter is rated #1 by employers in the US. This rating comes from hiring sites on Trustpilot with over 1,000 reviews. And right now, my listeners can try ZipRecruiter for free at this exclusive web address, ziprecruiter.com/thisiswar. If you love this show, show your support to it and to ZipRecruiter by going to ziprecruiter.com/thisiswar. That's ziprecruiter.com/thisiswar. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. One of the tricky things for U.S. soldiers whose mission was to train and support the Iraqi army and police was that the Americans occasionally were stuck between their own rules of engagement and those of the Iraqis. As the Iraqis mustered following the suicide bomb attack, Davies and the rest of the platoon were just along for the ride.
They feel like they know everybody, but at the same time, I think that makes them a lot more vulnerable to be susceptible to somebody to be able to come in, see what's going on, give intel. And, that's pretty much what happened. A female suicide bomber came in and American forces tried to stop her. The Iraqi commanders were like, oh, no problem. No reason to wait for a female U.S. soldier to come here. She entered the base, detonated herself, killed 2 high-ranking officials. They wanted to do an immediate mission. We jumped in the Humvees, loaded up with them. We went to a house. It was the immediate family of the woman who had killed herself. A lot of shouting, a lot of punching. We were pretty much ordered that this is their country. We operate by their rules. And they took two of the men and executed them, shot them point blank in the back of the head. That was what the fuck just happened? Like, is that legal? Like, should we have stepped in to play? Like, how the fuck did they get away with something like that? They just went and found that young woman's father and brother and killed them, and that was another big wake-up call. Yeah, a lot goes through your mind as far as, was that justice or was that revenge? Being a private, it's not like you get a say in it anyway. So another day down, another day closer to home, and it's also calls into question like how much how much trust you really have in the Iraqi army.
It's complex, there's no doubting it. Balancing out rage with action, taking the time to separate yourself as a warrior and not a street criminal in the heat of the moment, that's a personal choice. It's not an administrative policy. It's a distinction that wasn't lost on Davies. He had kicked down doors and he had killed enemy soldiers, but he tried to remember to keep that balance between his civilian humanity and his professional duties. Watching the Iraqis execute a family in retaliation only solidified his resolve to keep those two things very separate.
I don't think a lot of people realize how full on it is going on over there, and the things that are everyday challenges that most people would never ever fathom. Just the sheer simplicities of life and the security that we live in every day, of having to worry about getting mortared and rockets and IEDs and going out every day wondering, if this might be the last day. That was one of the biggest things. Being 18 years old there is, you kind of accept the fact that you might not come home. In fact, there's, a good probability that you might not come back home, especially in the infantry. And I think that's one of the major components that truly makes a soldier. And I think the other one is compassion. It's a good feeling having people that surround you and knowing that they would do everything and anything to save your life. I think that's massive, and being able to take steps that you never would have thought you had the courage to do. And then the other being compassion, because if you're out there kicking in doors and slamming heads and, destroying people's shit, thinking you're Billy Badass because you're the guy with the gun in their hand, I mean, you're just making more enemies for everyone. I sure as hell know that, if I watch somebody kick in my door and sit there and butt stroke my dad and completely brutally, rampage my entire house, the first thing I'm probably going to do afterwards is go join whatever fighting force is going against them. So I think that's a major thing for soldiers to have. Be courageous, but be compassionate.
As his 15 months in Iraq came to an end, Davies returned home with an eye on finishing out his contract and moving on with his life. But that's not the way things went. The Rakkasans were slated to be deployed to Afghanistan, and Davies, who'd been elevated to sergeant, set about training his squad, trying to prepare them as best as he could for combat. Although his contract was set to run out before deployment, Davies figured he'd be stop-lossed, which meant that he'd finish the tour in Afghanistan and then get out. But that was the year President Obama ended stop-loss, and he had a decision to make.
And so the whole script was flipped. They were like, you got to get out. I was just like, well, can't I just extend for the deployment? And they're like, definitely not. Yeah, and there was just no way I was going to turn my back on the men that I'd just trained from not knowing anything to go to war and be like, well, best of luck. I taught you everything I know. So just pretty much asked, what do I need to do? And they said, you have to re-enlist for a minimum of 2 years with the Army. So I walked in and signed up for 2 more years to go to Afghanistan with these guys.
Davies didn't confuse Iraq with Afghanistan even for a second, but as prepared as he was for the conflict and the demands, there was still so much more to Afghanistan than he had expected.
We were ordered to a place called Wazakwa, Afghanistan, which was insanely different from Iraq. Afghanistan, where we were at in the beginning, was desolate looking. It was huge mountains and loose slate rock. Not a whole lot of like foliage or anything like that. It was definitely a lot more barren looking. Getting there, we replaced the unit that had just recently lost Bo Bergdahl, and they had a bad taste in their mouth about him. That was kind of a weird twist in everything. They were pretty upset. They had lost guys on missions looking for him.
In 2009, Private Bo Bergdahl was captured by the Taliban and held for 5 years before being released. He pled guilty to desertion in 2017 and was dishonorably discharged, but he didn't do any time. The Paktika region of Afghanistan was way more relentless than patrolling in Iraq, and over the coming months, Davies and the rest of his group would learn new levels of endurance in the mountains of Afghanistan.
The IEDs in Afghanistan was next level. They were everywhere. Ones that I remember the most while in the Wazakwa province was en route to a location where we knew there was a high amount of enemy activity, and the truck that I was in, ended up encountering an IED detonating under the vehicle. I was in the back doing, what I shouldn't be doing, had my helmet off, was eating a can of tuna or some shit. I thought that our driver had drove off a cliff. I remember, just huge explosion almost, and yelling out, "What the fuck?" Because I thought he just drove off like the edge of a cliff. But it didn't take very long before I realized that was an IED. The entire MATV was completely covered in smoke and debris. People are seriously hurt, and I'm the only one, for some reason, still conscious. But it was just like, you're just surrounded by a bunch of unconscious, bleeding soldiers, and I think it just immediately, everything in me was just like, I need to get this door down, because you can't really move around with 5 people in the back. And as soon as the door came down, they opened up on us with small arms fire and mortars. They had us in the low ground in a big mountainous terrain. I think the medic's truck was probably 100 meters away, and just started grabbing guys and dragging them across open fire to get them to the medic. It's pretty insane how much your body can perform under those types of scenarios, knowing that, not only are their lives at risk, but yours as well. Some of them could stagger, some of them had to be drugged. I just knew that getting them to the medic was the best hope for them. And then as soon as that was done, just assessing the situation and figuring out what could get us out of this situation.
Heroism is kind of an odd concept, especially in situations like this. From the outside, we often hear people who have done extraordinary things dismiss suggestions that they acted heroically, but it kind of makes sense when you look at it. After all, the options were to give up and wait to die or to take some positive action. But there are plenty of stories about guys who do give up, who, in the grip of fear, merely stay in place and hope for the best. Alternatively, there are guys who take charge and act because they can see clearly that there's no point in hoping for the best when it's possible to affect an outcome.
Yeah, I just knew that they were accurate with their fire, and that they had fortified fighting positions. Trying to designate exactly where the fire was coming from was just as confusing. Grabbed a couple saw gunners and turret gunners, directed their fire toward where we were receiving contact from the mountainside, and ran all the way back to the truck, grabbed the 60mm mortar and a couple cans of ammo, and ran out. I just had tunnel vision. If we were going to stop receiving contact, that was kind of our option, was we needed that mortar tube, and it was in the vehicle that was blown up, and that I had to get back there. And that if I did, that gave us that glimpse of hope, and just fucking made it rain on that whole hillside. I probably went through a can of ammo in less than a minute. Wasn't even really assessing where my rounds were impacting. Just knew that something had to be done, or there was going to be a lot more casualties. Shortly after that, they're either killed or broke contact. I was able to call in a 9-line medevac, get the wounded medevaced out and on their way back, and was awarded an Army Commendation Medal with Valor that day for saving the lives of 25 men.
The thing about valor is it suggests something more real, maybe, or more meaningful than heroism. Heroism is all about the act. It's a way that we describe the acts of genuine bravery and courage. Valor is a little bit different. It's a perspective, a way not just of acting, but of looking at the world. Valor is the temperament of courage, a strength of both mind and will that is the motivating factor behind acts of heroism. This perspective was as much a part of Davies' decision-making when he worried about grenading civilians in Iraq as it was when he let loose all the hell he could muster on those attacking forces in Afghanistan. And before he was done with this final tour of his career, Davies would have his courage and his resolve pushed to their limits. Just a little more than 5 months into the tour, the Rakkasans had been rendered combat ineffective, having lost too many trucks. They were relegated to foot patrols and, without regular air support, often would have 18-hour-long firefights that would end with them just packing it in and heading back to base. Eventually, they were moved to the Ghazni province near Pakistan. The mission was the same. They were doing light infantry patrols with no trucks, but this time they were doing it in a city.
This is where it definitely switched from ambushes like that to being just boots on the ground with your platoon. The contact was nonstop. It was pretty much every day. Our fob was getting rocketed on the regular. We would go out on patrol, and it wasn't really a question of whether we were going to come into contact or not. It was just when we had our little fob, and then we had another fob that we ended up naming Fob Cutsforth because he was killed while serving there, and so we named it. Now I think it's called Fob Miri. But we are trying to build up that location as a to expand the bubble. And so we were constantly going on missions throughout there. I think one of the biggest ones that I remember specifically was pretty much the nearest Kalat to our base. So we didn't really expect much to occur, but we went there. We met with the local sheikh there. My squad and another one were told to go up on the rooftops and provide security. We were sitting up there for a little duration of time. We were then told to come down and withdraw from our position, and we got down, and another topic of conversation arose, and we were ordered to go back up on the roof. Shortly after, one of my guys was like, I'm pretty sure these guys coming in have RPGs on their back. I rushed over to their side, saw 3 motorcycles strolling up on our position that were definitely armored. They definitely had a bunch of weapon systems on them.
It's pretty rare that dumb luck is your ally when you're a U.S. soldier in Afghanistan, but there's a certain satisfaction when it happens. Davies radioed to check whether there were any Afghan National Army forces in the area, and there weren't. It didn't take too long to figure out what was going on. The platoon had arrived on foot and would be leaving the same way. The Taliban fighters got word when they'd be leaving, and they were rolling up to set up an ambush. This on a platoon that already had had significant losses from mountain ambushes. Sometimes the gods just smile on you.
Probably the only circumstance in which I feel like we had the upper hand to ambush somebody. Immediately when they got the call, they looked up, they saw us, they went for their weapons. We were able to kill 2 of them right off the get-go. One of the guys jumped over like a short mud wall. I started lobbing 40mm grenades over the wall. We were told to cease fire, and we saw this guy stand up. I drew down on him, and my platoon sergeant was like, don't shoot. He doesn't have a weapon anymore. He kind of just started stumbling around, and all of a sudden, he just kind of disappeared, and everybody was just left wondering what the hell just happened. We figured he had to have fallen down a well. My platoon sergeant told me and my squad to go clear the area, check the bodies.
The fighters had been less than 50 meters away when the fight started, so it wasn't a long walk to their position, but it sure was a tense one. This could have been just an initial force with a replacement platoon behind it. And even if this small force was the only one that was on its way to the ambush, the bodies had to be bagged up, and sometimes they had additional explosives wired to them. Then, of course, there was a guy who disappeared to consider.
You have your weapons at the high ready, eyes on target. You don't know if these guys are dead or not. Everybody's drawn down. Keep eyes on the outer perimeter. Watch for anybody fleeing in. Watch for more enemy to roll in on our position. So everybody's on extremely high alert. Adrenaline's pumping. I mean, you just came in contact in super close vicinity. So as we approached, I told one team to check the bodies that were already killed. I told the other team to go up the alleyway to look for anybody down further. And I went up to the well and peered over and saw the guy at the bottom of the well. He was mumbling something that I couldn't really understand, and he was fumbling with his vest. And within fractions of a second, I realized what he was doing. He was trying to get a grenade off of his vest, and so from probably 15 feet above him, standing over him, I shot him probably 4 or 5 times until he stopped moving. At that point, we had radioed in a QRF to come give us support, and then you have to bag up all the bodies. So we started bagging them up, and they're like, somebody's got to go down there and get that guy. And, they were like, well, you killed him. Go get him. Got down there, tried to be as careful as possible, trying to assess if he had time to set up any type of explosive devices. But I couldn't get him out of there. There was no way for me to physically be able to pick this guy up and climb back out of this well. By then, QRF had got there with some trucks. They dropped down a winch cable from the trucks. I wrapped it around this guy. Yeah, I had to ride him up almost like an elevator, because there was no way for me to climb out of there. So standing on this body while the winch cable tightened up, I could hear bones breaking and blood, exiting the holes that were put in him by me. Got him out. We got the cable off of him. He had, 2 pistols, I think 6 grenades, a plethora of different ammunition for his weapon systems, detailed maps, a bunch of intel, tons of money, and bagged him up and headed back to base.
There was a lot less satisfaction than Davies might have expected, and there was no celebrating at all. Had the platoon left at the appointed time, they would have taken significant casualties traveling on foot across that open landscape, and having the opportunity not only to avoid that ambush, but to actually get all of the guys concerned certainly was a victory. As Davies puts it, they stepped on the battlefield to take our lives, and we took theirs instead.
I had never killed a person under those circumstances. I'd never stood over someone and took their life. Definitely was a little different concept to try and fathom, but about 2 weeks before that, one of my good buddies, Bales, was machine gunned down, took a couple rounds through his back, and I think you kind of just justify the loss of their life with, you may have just got the guy that just killed your friend, or shot up your friend, or killed Cutsforth. So it's a good mix of emotions.
As his tour came to an end, Davies was ready to get out. He had joined as much to set himself on the straight and narrow as anything else, and had only re-upped to be there with his guys. He had spent the first 5 years of his adulthood either fighting, training, or partying, falling into bad habits and getting into a little trouble. Davies actually had been arrested on his first mid-tour leave for leading the police on a chase, but he scored a judge who let him return to his platoon. As it turned out, without the Army, though, he didn't have a good plan for how to get by.
You're leaving some of the best friends you've ever had in your life. I didn't really have a plan upon getting out. Like, my assumption is that I would go to college and probably become a firefighter like my father. That was kind of my main thing is you have this whole concept that you're supposed to get out and make millions and build an empire. What is success? And, thankfully I made a decision to go ahead and take 2 years out of my life to where I was just going to go and enjoy myself and enjoy the country that I had fought for and get out and see different places and do what I wanted to do.
And what he wanted to do, apparently, was get into extreme sports. He fell in with a group of kayakers and eventually turned pro, touring the world on the sponsorship circuit. Those 2 years made a world of difference in his life and gave him some insight into how he could continue to serve both his country and the people who had fought for it.
It just kind of catapulted me into turning the chapter on my life. I was still being able to find the same exhilarating, uncertain adrenaline rush through a more healthy, productive lifestyle. I just had thought, shit, what if more veterans could figure this out? The amount of impact that it would have on them and better their lives, both physically and mentally. And I'd met other veterans in the sport, and we'd always discuss that. And one of my buddies, Chad Cook, the one that I told you about originally, that I grew up with and joined the military with, he had got out, and unfortunately, he ended up taking his own life. And that's when I knew something had to be done, something needed to change. And And so I just kind of dedicated my life to helping others find the same outlet that had helped me so tremendously.
Davies started and now runs an organization called PTSD Veteran Athletes. It's a nonprofit that funds the gear and the travel and then provides combat veterans training in extreme sports.
We send them back with their gear. It's theirs to keep so they can continue to pursue that new positive direction in life that just gives you that clarity, that mental escape, that release that I feel like every veteran needs. I think if most people were to take a step back and just try to, for a moment, fathom the idea of going to a third world country and having to take lives that were taken by your hands and then coming back and trying to adjust to the social norm, that more people could realize why PTSD is having such a tragic effect on soldiers returning from combat.
Russell Davies joined the Army in part because it was an outlet for his teenage aggression, a productive way to channel negative energy into positive. Over the course of his 5 years in the Army, though, he didn't channel enough, and in fact, he collected more. In that process, though, he developed new senses, a sense of valor, and of service, and of brotherhood, so that by the time he left the Army, it made perfect sense that he would learn to channel those things as well. Next time on This Is War.
You start hearing chants down the bottom of the hill, and there's more and more of them coming, and it sounds like there's 500 dudes down there. My interpreter, he's very nervous. Say, hey, what are all these guys saying? He says, hey man, these dudes are saying death to America. I could see the fear overwhelm them.
Are you a combat veteran, or do you know one with a story to tell? Reach out to us at stories@thisiswar.com with your dates and branch of service, as well as a brief description of the experience that you would like to share. If you like the show, you can help support us by visiting our sponsors or by leaving a 5-star review wherever you're listening right now. This Is War was written by me, Anthony Russo, and produced by Incongruity Media. Executive producer Hernan Lopez for Wondery.